Hello everyone, good afternoon and good morning wherever you are. Welcome to the webinar on risk assessment of environmental noise impacts. My name is Frank Thomsen and beside me here is Nicolai Heilskov, and we will give a joint presentation on this risk assessment of noise impacts. The way we have planned is that we give half an hour or so, 40 minutes presentation divided in two parts. You are able to address questions once we have started with the presentation in the chat function. We will collect these questions at the end, and then we will have a 20 minutes question and answer session. In the talk, we will talk about sound and marine life. What are the issues? We will also look at how can noise impacts be investigated best. We will then have some summary on what's new on the regulatory front. And then Nicolai will take over to explain a little bit about the Underwater Acoustic Simulator, our new software and mic. And then we will mention the courses we are planning in spring this year in March and April. Now, before we go into detail, we want to describe what is really sound. Now, sound is a traveling wave in a medium like water or air, and it's defined in decibels as sound intensity. And decibel is denoted as sound pressure level in 20 log P divided by P0. And this P0 value is quite important because that's the reference pressure. Now, what one has to remember is that the reference pressure underwater is different from in air. Underwater, it's 1 micropascal. In air, it's 20 micropascal. So basically, that means that decibel values in water and in air can't be compared directly. Another important variable is pitch, the cycles of the sound wave per second denoted in hertz or kilohertz. So both these variables will pop up during the presentation, decibel and hertz or kilohertz. Why are we interested in sound underwater? Now, it's quite simple. Water is just an excellent medium for sound transmission. Sound is more than 4 times faster underwater compared to air, and there's much less attenuation. So consequently, sound ranges can be very far underwater. And this is also the reason why sound is really important for marine life. Marine life has evolved to receive and to emit sounds. And many marine life have very interesting sounds. And I want to play back one sound here. This is from northern resident killer whales, recorded about 20 years ago during my PhD in British Columbia. You heard long-ranging chords that the animals use to stay in contact with one another. So the baseline is that marine life uses sound for communicating, for navigating, for orientation, and for finding prey. And if you look at impacts, then we also look at their sensitivity. What sounds do they hear? And this is shown here in this graph. On the x-axis, you can see frequency. On the y-axis, sound pressure level in decibel. And these are audiograms. These are hearing curves of some marine mammals. And they go from very low sensitivity in this area here to very, very good sensitivity to underwater sound in the higher frequencies. And if you look at, this is an example here. I have to go back a slide and activate the pointer. So you can see here the harbor porpoise, for example, has a very bad or very poor sensitivity in lower frequencies. And the sensitivity is increasing as we go along. This is a green line here. And it's a very good sensitivity to underwater sound at very high frequencies at around 100 kilohertz. And this is typical for marine mammals. They have a very wide bandwidth of hearing, but they hear really well in the higher frequencies compared to the lower frequencies. Now, for fish, it's a different story. Fish is more sensitive to lower frequencies and has a more restricted hearing bandwidth. And this is shown here. You can see here that the x-axis is extending from 10 hertz to 1 kilohertz. that the cod here, for example, is quite sensitive in this area between 10 Hertz and around 1 kilohertz. So fish here hear well in lower frequencies. Marine mammals hear well in higher frequencies, and marine mammals have, compared to fish, a wider bandwidth of hearing. And this is important if you look at impacts. If you look at the marine sound sources beside marine animals, we can see that there's a whole lot of sound out there that is produced by both marine life, but also by humans. And this is shown here on the x-axis. Again, you can see the frequency from 1 Hertz to all the way to above 100 kilohertz. And on the y-axis, again, as a sound pressure level. And you can see here that shipping is in the lower frequencies, also in this case low intensity. Then you got submarines, a little bit higher in sound pressure levels, so more intense. Then drilling and dredging. These are source levels, back-calculated levels at the source, and you can see that they are relatively low in frequency here, this dredging sound here, and that they go out with between 150 and 180 decibel. Now, higher than that, above that, you can perhaps see the seismic airgun array. And seismic airguns are used for geophysical exploration, and they're quite loud. They're above 200 decibel. And the same is true for pile driving. Most pile driving sound used for offshore wind farm construction goes out with much more than 200 decibel. The frequencies of these sounds are usually low, with most energy below 1 kilohertz. So basically, the oceans are not quiet. The oceans are quite filled with sound, both from marine life and also from humans. Now, for impact assessments, it's important to consider that we are following a risk-based approach. And this risk-based approach is comprised of several steps, from identifying what is the problem. This is really the first step, and to then investigating how far does the sound spread and how many animals are in the range of the sound. And this is something that we approach with our underwater acoustic simulator, which Nicolai will talk about a little bit more in detail later. The next step is then, once we know where the sound is and what the exposure to the animals is, we want to know how do they react to the sounds. We call that the dose-response assessment. And if we find an impact or a significant impact, we want to manage these impacts by, for example, mitigating adverse impacts, perhaps reducing the sound levels. And I will talk you through all these different steps. Now, if you look at the first bit, identifying the problem, this is taken from Richardson in 1995, and this is the zones of noise influence model. And these are zones out from the center, which is denoted red in the center here. This red area is the sound source. And then out from the center, out to a certain distance, there are different zones where noise can have an impact. Now, relatively far from the sound source, there is a possibility of detecting a sound without apparent reaction. A little bit closer by, the sound from humans have the possibility to mask biological relevant signals, and this can lead to communication difficulties in marine life. Now, another zone, even closer by, or actually also overlapping with masking, is the behavior response zone. And this is a very variable zone because behavior responses are very variable. They can range from very subtle reactions like tail fluking to outright avoidance of relatively large areas by marine life. Closer to the sound source even, there is a potential of hearing loss, either as temporary threshold shift, which is a temporary shift in the hearing threshold that we have seen in these audiograms, or a permanent threshold shift that is affecting certain frequencies permanently. So a permanent hearing loss at certain frequencies, you can say. And then closer by, there's a potential of, and usually at very high received sound pressure levels, there's a potential of injury of marine life. So all these impacts can happen, of course, depending on a variety of factors. Now, if you look at detection, this here on the left is a picture of a hypothetical pile driving scenario in Polish waters and in the eastern Baltic. And you can see here in the middle, this red area is the sound source, the pile driving source, impact pile driving. and the red area goes out to a certain distance. This is well above ambient sound, and then you can see further out, yellow and green. These levels are still above ambient sound, and they are approximately 30 to 50 kilometers from the sound source. You can actually postulate with that pile driving is audible over a quite wide range from the sound source. But of course, detection for other sound sources can be much less, depending on the source strength, the sound spread, and different ambient noise conditions. So it's really difficult to make any generalizations of sound detection. This pile driving is just one example. Now, for masking, we have to consider the sounds the animals emit themselves and the range of impact sounds. If you look at this scale below here, you can see that it ranges from 1 Hertz to 100 kilohertz, and shipping has its main energy between 10 Hertz and 1 kilohertz. And tooth weights, for example, they have a quite wide bandwidth of sounds. This has to be expected because they have also a very wide bandwidth of hearing. But their frequencies they mainly use are shifted to the higher spectrum, analog to their hearing. So there's overlap, but not a really significant one. Now, seals and sea lions have more sounds at the lower frequency, so there's a little bit more overlap. And if you look at the fish here, this is quite prominent. You can see that most of the sounds of fish have what we call a high masking potential with regards to shipping sounds, so they can be masked by shipping. And the same holds true somewhat for larger weights, which have also a lot of sounds at the lower frequencies. For them, masking could potentially be a huge issue. Now, what about behavioral reactions? Behavioral reactions are diverse. They depend on a variety of factors like properties, duration, transient, continuous of the sound source, of course, then the channel, the propagation characteristics of the media, and of course also on a lot of internal variables like age, condition, social state, season, and behavioral state of the receiver. So it's very, very difficult, again, to generalize on behavior response because they're just so very variable. I have picked one example from a quite famous study done in 1996 by Engers. They looked at a response of haddock and cod to seismic airgun sounds during a seismic survey. Remember, seismic airgun sounds are quite loud, above 200 decibel, and they're low in frequency. So you would expect that there's an overlap with the sensitivity of fish. And what they did is they did catch rate studies. They caught fish at different positions from the center out to distances of about 20 nautical miles from the sound source. They did that before, during, and after the seismic surveys. And they found that the catch rate was much lower during compared to before the seismic survey took place. And that led them to conclude that there was a quite large-scale effect, behavior effect, because they concluded that fish would simply leave the area during the seismic survey. And it took 5 days to recover so that the catches would return to normal. So this example shows that there can be actually quite profound, there can be the potential for quite profound behavior reactions due to sound exposure. Now, what does it all mean? If animals just swim out, they move to another location, might not mean very much for an individual. Now, the population level consequences of acoustic disturbance have been put into a model in the PCAT model that was developed by the National Research Council in 2005, and it has undergone iterations since then. And it really is comprised of several different steps, from sound over to behavioral change, life functions, vital range affected, and then finally population level effects. And all these different variables are in these boxes, and there are transfer functions from one of the box to another. So what type of sound has what type of effect on the behavior, then the type of behavior might have an effect on a life function affected. So a sound has a certain duration. It can affect diving, for example. Here, then during a migration, it can affect a vital life function of an animal. What is really important if you look at the PCAT model is that these transfer functions of the model are not really well understood as of now. We have very little evidence pointing at, especially at the later parts of the model. We know a little bit about sound and behavioral change, but not very much about the later parts. So there are a lot of gaps to be filled, and there are studies ongoing right now that are precisely attempting this gap filling exercise. We have to remember, though, as well, that strandings or behavior reactions can lead to imminent, really serious consequences. We know that strandings of some whale species have been caused by behavioral changes due to naval sonar exposure to naval sonar sounds. So behavior changes can lead to strandings and death of animals. Now, what about TTS, temporary hearing threshold shift? In this regard, the acoustic dose concept is really important. So if you look at this harbor porpoise here, this porpoise swims happily in the waters, and here's a pie driving operation. And what I did is I just calculated an impact range based on quite realistic assumptions that are shown here. And if you look at one strike and look at impact criteria, sound impact criteria, then you would arrive at a zone of around 700 meters from the sound source where TTS would occur for these species. Now, this is for one strike, but if you have several strikes, like for example over an hour, the situation changes because the acoustic energy from the single strikes is actually adding up and supposedly also hits the receiver. So if the harbor porpoise doesn't move, the impact range is actually extended from 700 meter to 12.5 kilometer in this case. So the animal that was safe for one strike isn't really safe for a number of strikes any longer. But in reality, of course, what really happens with these animals is that they move. They move in response of environmental variables, they move in response to underwater sound, to a whole lot of factors. And any impact assessment that is actually not looking at these movements is truly very limited. Now at DHI we have developed what we call a dynamic risk assessment model for acoustic disturbance to analyze movements of whales to underwater sound. In response to underwater sound, and we are doing this together with Statoil. And what we are using for these investigations is a technology called agent-based modeling, which is basically modeling the movements of particles in a model environment, giving an unlimited number of variables. And I want to play back one simulation. So what you can see in this simulation, and I should just speak over it, is that these are two different stocks of beluga whales. The green is the eastern Chukchi sea stock, the purple one is the western stock, and they move into the Bering Strait. This is below here is the US, on the left side is, or above is Russia, and you can see this seismic pulse in the center. This is a seismic survey, and you can see the agents moving out of the behavioral impact zone. The survey has now stopped and the agents move back into the area. This is of course over a long period of time, over time of a survey before and during and after. So what you can actually do with these models is you can investigate long-term consequences of these behavioral exposures. And of course these models have to be validated with real data, but they can be used in cumulative impact assessments, for example for marine spatial planning purposes. And the data is getting better as we speak because there are a lot of studies out there now that actually look at behavior response of whales to noise. Now, last but not least, if you find there's an impact, for example, using your dynamic risk assessment or other impact assessment methodologies, you have tools or options for the risk management. And there are basically three ways you can do that. You can mitigate sounds at the source, for example, up here using these pile driving caps you put on a pile driver to just dampening the source. A second reduction technology is what I call channel mitigation. You put something in between the sound source and the animal in the water column where the sound is trapped, and this happens when you put in bubble curtains out. Bubble curtains are bubble emissions, air bubbles that are released into the water, and the sound is reflected at these bubbles and trapped. And they seem to be quite effective. And there are different technologies like NMS, noise mitigation system, that is used by Dong Energy in German waters, and a Helmholtz resonator that is denoted here by a chap called Mark Wochner in the US. He has developed that system, and they're based on all the same principle, on these air-filled structures where sound is trapped. And they seem to be, of course, depending on environmental conditions, quite effective in some cases. Now, the third way you can mitigate sound is using what I call receiver mitigation. You can put in acoustic devices into the water to chase the animals out of the zone of immediate danger. And these are these aqua marks here below, which we also call acoustic pingers. So basically 3 ways: source mitigation, channel mitigation, and receiver mitigation. Now let's talk a little bit about regulation. There are basically 2 important things going on right now. One is in Europe, and this is the Marine Strategy Framework Directive. Now, the Marine Strategy Framework Directive has a goal for the EU member states to achieve good environmental status in their waters by 2020. The European Commission hopes that the member states do that along 11 descriptors for good environmental status. One of these descriptors is covering underwater sound and other forms of energy. And within that descriptor, there are 2 indicators. One is covering the issue of acute exposure to loud, low, and mid-frequency impulsive sounds, like this pile driver here. The other one is covering chronic exposure to continuous low-frequency sounds due to shipping, leading to, for example, communication difficulties. So there are 2 indicators addressing 2 different issues. And at the moment, the European Commission is setting up advice to monitoring programs where the member states can actually develop monitoring programs to measure these 2 indicators. It's basically a pressure concept where monitoring is used to monitor the pressure rather than the impact as of now. A second huge development that is ongoing is a revision of exposure criteria. Noise exposure criteria are criteria that shouldn't be sound levels that shouldn't be exceeded in order not to hurt marine life or to injure it or to lead to behavioral reactions. And in 2007, Southall et al. Came out with a paper publishing a variety of noise exposure criteria, and this is currently under revision. And NOAA is also revising their guidance for assessing the effects of anthropogenic sounds on marine mammals as we speak, and this is under preparation. And both papers are working in parallel, and they will no doubt be having a very high attention when they come out. So this is basically covering my part, a little bit the generic things, the risk assessment. And I have mentioned, I think, the exposure assessment when you look at the sound ranges. Now we have done much more on this, and all you need to know about this will be told to you by Nicolai now.
Thank you, Frank. The next part of this webinar will be on modeling of underwater acoustics with the new developed Underwater Acoustic Simulator by Mike, powered by DHI. Mike is the commercial DHI software suite which holds a number of modules for planning and marine operations. The Underwater Acoustic Simulator in Mike is a sound propagation model. It accounts for a noise source of broadband nature. It is range dependent, and which means that it takes into account a number of ambient conditions. These conditions are, for instance, the bathymetry, which you will see over to the right. And by clicking here, I hope, just need the pointer. So here you see this is the seabed, and the structure of the seabed is accounted for. It accounts for a temperature variation in the water column. It accounts for the change in salinity, and also the absorption in the seabed is modeled, which means that sound can travel in the seabed. Furthermore, volume attenuation in the water column is modeled, which is significant for high frequencies. With the Underwater Acoustic Simulator, focus is on risk assessment of marine life, and by embedding it into the mic framework, we will have the mic graphical user face, which is easy to use. Furthermore, you will have easy access to hydrodynamics, which means that from a mic HD model you will be able to extract environmental properties needed for your underwater acoustic simulation. Furthermore, it's automated in the sense of that all the numerical settings are given automated for the user, which means that you can focus on setting up the properties of your underwater acoustics model. Furthermore, it is automated in terms of computational grid, which means that all the grid where the calculations are calculated are given to the user without he having to think about this. Examples of applications could be offshore wind turbines, installations, seismic surveys, shipping, drilling, dredging. A number of different sound sources can be modeled in the Underwater Acoustic Simulator. The Underwater Acoustic Simulator is an integrated solution in the mic suite, which means that that you are able to directly transfer your sound maps and do, like Frank talked about, a dynamic risk assessment using the agent-based model app in the mic suite. This is to the right is an example of a computation. Now I will take you through some of the steps for doing underwater acoustic analysis using the newly developed UAS tool. For this purpose I have chosen to look at the pile driving example, where you, for instance, used when you install the offshore wind turbines. So you have a hammer which hammers down this pile, and sounds are generated from this hammering and are radiated away from the pile in the water column and also through the soil. This is the calculations are done in order to assess the impact ranges for marine life. So first you will have to set up your domain, and by this you need to have inputted your bathymetry, and this UAS allows you to directly import your bathymetry through your mic hydrodynamic model. In the UAS you have this tree structure which you see out here, which is a common way to set up a simulation in the mic suite. So you go through all these steps and end out at the bottom where you start your simulation. For instance, the next step in setting up your simulation would be to define your sound source, and this UAS allows you an easy way to do that. You can either easily plug in a constant value for your sound source, you can give a location, or you can read in the spectrum through a file, which you can see over here. It's a broadband spectrum read in. You can also scale your spectrum if you want, if this is needed. Now the second part that you need to do is to define the environmental properties in your water phase. First you need to specify the speed of sound. Depending on how complex your problem is, you can either have a constant speed of sound, Maybe you can use that in case of shallow waters, or you can have you can read in a variation of the sound speed in the vertical water column. And as you see over here, the sound speed profile can vary during a season. Next, you need to set up your water phase in terms of attenuation, and this can be done in a number of ways. We have 4 different models here, and if you are in doubt, you can always seek online help by pressing F1. And this will give you open up a window where you will get a short description of what the settings you have here, and then, for instance, you see that you can either set the attenuation as a constant, or you can read in your own definition file of the volume attenuation in the water column, or you can let the computer calculate volume attenuation based on the constant values of temperature, salinity, or acidity, or you can have a profile file of temperature, salinity, and acidity imported in and then through a calculation based on Francois and Garrison, you will get a volume attenuation profile for your simulation. Here we have chosen to have constant values, for instance, temperature of 13 degrees and salinity of 18.5 and acidity of 8. Next, you need to define your properties in your seabed. For this, you take your geological profile and then you make an assessment of this, and UAS then gives you the option of defining an arbitrary number of seabed layers. For instance, in this case, we have sand, clay, and chalk, and you define these the acoustic properties by saying, for instance, the density and the compressional wave speed and compressional attenuation needed for the computation. Finally, you will have an easy access to define your output, which you have 2 different kinds of output. You have a 2D output and a 1D output. In this figure, it's shown the 2D output, which option you have. For instance, you can specify transmission loss for each frequency. You can have the sound exposure level for each frequency calculated as an output, or you can have the overall values of transmission loss or sound exposure level. You can also choose if you want to have the output of the sound transmission in the seabed or not. This is helpful to save computational memory on your hard drive if you don't really need the sound field in the seabed. The common workflow for a noise impact assessment is that you take your marine filter for the species relevant for the area that you are looking at. For instance, here we have pinnipeds, and this is the M weighting filter. Then you filter your calculations or your results using a threshold. Either it could be a PTS, permanent threshold shift, or TTS, depending on what kind of analysis you want to use, and these are of course depending on which species you are looking at. And by applying this, you will see some contours in your noise map, and from these contours you can calculate the impact ranges, which means that when do these thresholds are they succeeded? So UAS provides an easy way to QA your raw data through the mic suite. So by clicking your results file, you will be able to easily see the raw data. And for instance, here we see the transect plot for this calculation with the pile driving, and you have the sound source at this side, and then sound is radiated through the water column and through the seabed. But I've chosen not to show, clicked off the seabed to not see the sound transmission in the seabed. And furthermore, you are also able to specify the resolution of your result file, which means that you can also save memory. And this is why this is you can see it has a very coarse resolution, but by defining a higher resolution, you will get a smooth bathymetry outline. To the left, you see the sound transmission laws, and this is plotted against geometrical spreading laws, just to make a quality assurance of your data that it's not way off. After this QAing, you can use different tools to make your plots for your reporting. For instance, the mic suite offers different kind of ways to do plotting, or you can use a MATLAB tool to generate a more a nicer plot of your results. For instance, over here you will see the sound transmission in terms of frequency content. So you have the black line up here is the just very close to the source, and as you go further away from the source, you can see that the sound is attenuated, and at the furthest away, you will see that some of the frequency totally drops out because it's attenuated. You can do also a number of other analyses. For instance, I've chosen here to show you that you have your results of the sound exposure level here in the blue curve. And this is the radial direction away from the source, and by applying a mitigation measure, you will be able to reduce your sound in the way that it's shown in the green line here. You can also have do a cumulative analysis, which means that you will account for the number of blows with your hammer during 1 hour, and then by applying a source mitigation measure, you will be able to reduce the sound as shown here by the purple from unmitigated to mitigated sound. The UAS has been validated against two very common test cases. The first one is the Lloyd's mirror test case, which is a test case where you apply a source at the sea surface, and then you see reflections down. The second one is the ideal wedge test case. Both test cases was successfully run and matches almost perfectly with the analytical and numerical results given in the papers. So summarizing, for the first time ever, we have now a unique integrated solution, which means that you have, together with your underwater acoustic simulator, an option to directly import hydrodynamic properties as shown here into your acoustic model, and then when you have done your acoustic simulation, you can combine it with an animal response simulator as the ABM lab, and then you will have a dynamic risk assessment of your sound field. Furthermore, the UAS provides a time-saving interface, which means that you can very quickly do your acoustic simulation, as it is automated, as I told you, in the sense of you don't have to think about numerics or jitter generation. It provides a basis for managing impacts of underwater sound on marine life. Now, Frank and I, we can either help you do this kind of simulations, or you have the option of buying a software license for either the Underwater Acoustic Simulator by itself, or you can have like the whole package of integrated solutions going from the hydrodynamics all the way to the dynamic risk assessment tool. Now I'll give the word to Frank again, and he will conclude this webinar and also give you some information about an upcoming exciting software course on the UAS.
Thank you very much, Nicolai. Yes, everyone, a couple of slides to finish things off. I think we have learned today that man-made noise can impact marine life in quite various ways. We believe that the sound impacts are best assessed using a risk-based approach. And we also think that DHI has developed novel tools to assess sound impacts. We have the agent-based modeling for cumulative impact assessments and looking at response movement of whales. And then we have the Underwater Acoustic Simulator, or software tool, to actually measure sound ranges or model sound ranges at different distances for the impact assessment. We go into much more detail very soon. We have 2 courses coming up, one in Denmark on the 9th of March and one in Singapore on the 13th of April, and they will cover modeling of underwater acoustics. We will go much more in detail into the risk assessment framework, and we will also make you actually the experts in using the underwater acoustic simulator, because we have some test case you can run. So it's a 1-day course, and we hope it's going to be very interesting for you. Now, that's about it. When you have questions, please address them, the acoustic questions, to Nicolai, and the biological questions to me. And there's also, of course, our software support that then can help you with all software-related questions. And with that, we conclude this webinar, a talking session, I should say, and we're up to the more interactive part now. We have 43 minutes up, so we have roughly 15 minutes left for questions.